Childhood. You did it. You pressed play. That's always the most challenging part in starting an audiobook, right? I get it. Internally, you're thinking, who the heck is this guy? And what kind of ego leads a person to write a book about their life? That's a valid concern, but I think we can get past it if I can nail this intro. I just need a gripping hook to draw you in. That's what all the great authors do. So, let's start with this bombshell of a beginning. I am gay. On second thought, that's a terrible hook, and most definitely not a bombshell. I'm not famous, and this isn't the 90s, so no one cares. Is that really in my outline? There it is. My editor's gonna be pissed. Okay, not a great start, but we can fix this. Slight change. Coming out was just a clarification, in case you missed the title of the book. It definitely was not the hook I spent years refining, because that would just be stupid, obviously. So, on to the real hook, which I totally planned all along. I'm a Mormon. Yeah, we'll go with that. Like the old ad campaign. I'm a Mormon. At least, I used to be a Mormon. I'm not sure what I am now, and not just because the term Mormon lost its noun status. So I'm supposed to clarify that I used to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Look, don't blame me for that run-on sentence of a name. I grew up in the church with my family. Mom, dad, sister, 2 brothers, a couple of pets to throw into the mix. I was the youngest, not including the pets. To say my childhood was ideal would be an understatement, but also an oversimplification. I grew up in the biggest house in the suburb, complete with a theater and indoor basketball court. See? Ideal. Dad was a little strict, but you can't have everything, right? Dad must have thought so, at least, because he left 2 months before my 12th birthday. It happened on a Sunday. He and Mom had been fighting a lot. That Sunday, they locked themselves in their room and shouted at one another well into the afternoon. My siblings and I sat despondently around the kitchen. We knew it was over. The world was slipping out from under us. The tiny version of myself snuck up to my parents' bedroom door and heard one word that changed my world: affair. I ran back to where my siblings waited with downcast eyes. We all knew what was happening. Somehow, it seemed an inevitable end to our perfect lives. The shouting stopped with a decision we had no part in. Dad slammed the bedroom door behind himself, leaving Mom in the room with no identity. He passed us in the kitchen on his way out, trying to conceal his tears. I'm leaving now. His hysterical voice contradicted the confidence of his words. For good this time. And he did, letting all his promises of our eternal family rattle apart. But it wasn't all bad. We got to see him every few months, including the time he visited with his new wife to take half the furniture. The house felt really empty after that. Mom had never wanted such a big house. We might have sold it after the divorce, but once 2008 rolled around, nobody wanted to buy a suburban mansion. Mom remarried. One by one, my siblings left me, beginning their lives and fulfilling their church responsibilities. I stayed home to help Mom and my stepdad tend the 12,000 square foot house. The halls, once so full of light and life, became pale and lifeless, a little prison of Dad's creation. Where before we used to be all one family, I was now alone. Dad was to blame. But my issues were just beginning. I had a new problem of earth-shattering proportions. Childhood for me included a persistent nagging in my gut that something was wrong with me. I mean, there is, but that's totally unrelated to this other thing. It began as a slow realization. My childhood friend Mason had perfected a new multi-use insult. You're gay, he would often say. Or, when he wanted me to give in to going along with one of his plans, he switched it up to, don't be gay. This was during a time when everything was gay. A thing was gay if it was annoying, inconvenient, me, boring, or if Mason was having a bad day. Maybe he wasn't the best friend after all. So what if I'm gay? I once said in my defense. Why is that so bad? What does that even mean? Mason laughed and then explained. You know how guys like girls? Well, being gay is when a guy likes guys and wants to be with them instead of women. The news was more devastating than I could have imagined. My gut reaction was to think, but that's me. I hit Mason, yelling, I'm not gay. Over and again, I said the words as if the repetition could manifest a new truth. But I knew two things. I liked men, and men liking men was repulsive. I shut it out, kept it secret. Sex was a mystery to me, but I understood that my thoughts lined up with being gay. For so long, I denied what it meant. I knew somehow that it would go away. Perhaps when I got the priesthood, I would be normal. That day came. My dad's dad had to give me the Aaronic priesthood since Dad had just walked out. I was the only son who wouldn't trace his priesthood lineage through him. I was both sad and relieved over that fact. This was a new beginning. Grandpa laid his hands on my head and gave me the priesthood. I began passing the sacrament, though deep down I knew I was unworthy. My fellow deacons began talking about girls and sports, and I could not participate. I was an imposter, a scourge. Entering Young Men's meant that I and my fellow deacons were ready for the talk. Lessons on chastity focused on sexual purity and not looking at lewd pictures of women. I would sit in the line of deacons, self-assured in my ability to abstain from the female variety of human. I was so wrong and unnatural that the things I experienced weren't worth discussing alongside purity. Being gay was something else, closer to an illness or an addiction. It was wickedness, an offense to God. Second only to murder as a sin. Truly, I was a monster. Being born in the last days, I was raised as if I mattered more than nations. But I harbored a secret that nullified my value. The world held no place for something like me. But I could still fix this. I often thought that I needed to tell Mom. Perhaps it wouldn't be so hard if she were on my side. But how could I bring that up? When life was good, I would psych myself up to tell her, but I always froze. I couldn't say it. I entered junior high and thus seminary, where I gained a fresh, new perspective of the doctrine and God's plan for His children. The plan was for us to become like God. He had provided His Son, which allowed us to overcome weakness, challenges, and adversity. Surely, if there was ever a challenge worth Christ's intervention, it was mine. Gay people were wrong, rebellious. That was something I refused to be. I would prove to God that I was faithful, and He would reward me by removing my attraction to men. I began reading the Book of Mormon on a loop. Not only that, but I prayed morning and night. Church attendance was a must. My broken family sometimes struggled in worshiping God outside of church, so I often encouraged us to do so. My testimony deepened. I found refuge in my Heavenly Father's love. He was not the mean, scary God of the Old Testament, but a kind, loving being who understood me. And yes, He would help me overcome all my weaknesses. One evening, after years of prayer and shame, I received the confirmation I sought. I was on my knees in my room praying, determined to show my earnest faith. Enos in the Book of Mormon had prayed through the night, and so would I, if need be. In a weak, trembling voice, I whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. The voice, still and small, came into my head. You are, because I made you. I began sobbing, muscles shaking. I had been so discouraged. Hearing that voice was the comfort I sought. The message was clear. Be patient. All things would be made right in time, and I now felt ready to wait on the Lord. Junior high became high school. Gym class was a daily disaster. I carried around this pit in my stomach every day, knowing I had no way out of the class. Arriving early helped, beating the locker room rush. I kept my eyes down, made no friends, and got out with a cursory glance at the showers. I became a priest, responsible for blessing the sacrament for the entire ward. Every Sunday, I sat at the front of the ward, knowing I was a monster. If they only knew my desires, I thought, they would bar me from this privilege, and rightfully so. I suspected from observing Mason and my other childhood friends that this problem, this secret, was not something other people were dealing with. So either everyone I knew was playing an elaborate practical joke on me, or how I experienced the world was contradictory to the way things were supposed to work. I had to overcome this, whatever it took. I began trimming every sin I had control over from my life. I avoided things that might arouse me, and experimented with trying to subdue that gut-churning magnetism that came upon me when I saw an attractive man. The inevitable daily failures made me hate myself, hate what God had made of me. My actions and habits were easier to control than my reactions, though, and I brought everything in line with prophetic guidance. Everything I did or viewed had to invite the Spirit. My callings and church activities became a priority, though I never particularly enjoyed scouting. Movies and video games that invaded my thoughts threatened my relationship with God, and needed to be avoided. I even taught myself to edit MP3 files to remove swear words from my favorite songs. Faithfulness was my only lifeline, becoming as close to perfect as humanly possible. Only then would God fix me from being gay. None of it was enough. So, I began fasting every week on Tuesday. If I was going to warrant God's help, I needed to do everything possible to get His attention. My entire junior year, I fasted for God's divine intervention. He had raised the dead in the Bible. He could fix this. Fix me. I had done all I could think of, sacrificed everything God might want removed from my life. Except for one thing, which seemed the biggest sacrifice of all.